Welcome everybody to the 2023 edition of our Sustaining Our World lecture. It's the flagship event of the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences here in the College of the Environment at the University of Washington. My name is Dan Brown. I'm the director of the school, and I'm here to introduce today's speaker. This event we do every year to bring a lecture from a speaker whose work is at the forefront of thinking and sustainability in the environmental and forest sciences, and that is of interest to a broad range of interdisciplinary and societal collaborators. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, recognizing that we at the University of Washington acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands of the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. In our work here in SEFS, that means that our work on stewardship, restoration, and management of natural resources aims to build into our program respect for the original inhabitants and stewards of the lands in which we work, recognition of and reciprocity in working with the sovereignty of tribal governments, and the traditional knowledge that comes from generations of land stewardship. Just a little bit of how this is going to work, a little bit of structure. Following my introduction, we'll have Jerry speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and some answers, perhaps, if we're lucky. The questions can come from in the room. I'm going to move this microphone over here, and if you have questions in the room, I'm going to ask you to come up and use the microphone. We are streaming the event so people online can hear the question, and also I'm going to ask you to speak up so that everybody can hear the questions. And then for those of you who are listening online, we can take questions through the chat feature of YouTube. Just go into the chat to the right of the video screen and you can enter your question, and I'll be monitoring that and bring some of those questions forward as well. On to the main event. We're really excited that Dr. Jerry Franklin is here to present. He's a professor emeritus in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. His work has embodied the theme of sustainability over multiple decades, work as a forester in the Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station in Western Oregon, and another few decades here as a professor at the University of Washington in this College of Forest Resources, which is the predecessor to the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. His work is widely recognized both for its stellar scientific contributions and its significant impact on management, on the practice of forest management. As an academic, Jerry has received many awards, multiple honorary doctorates, and has been recognized as a fellow of, and I got to take a breath here because it's a long list, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Ecological Society of America, the American Institute of Biological Sciences, the British Ecological Society, the Society of Conservation Biology, and the International Association of Landscape Ecology. His scientific work is highly cited, and he's trained over 30 PhD students who've gone on to research positions in agencies, companies, and universities around the world. Perhaps more importantly, his work has altered the course of forest management in the Pacific Northwest and in the world. Through his attention to the integration of ecological and economic values into harvest strategies, he's helped shape how we understand and manage healthy forest ecosystems. His work has helped define and refine our understanding of old-growth forests, and his work on ecologically based forest management has earned him the unofficial title as the father of new forestry. Dr. Franklin has worked for several former presidents on forest policy issues, and he served on a commission on old-growth forests that resulted in the formulation of the Northwest Forest Plan in 1992. This is a series of federal policies and guidelines that led to the protection of old growth and refocused the Forest Service's mission on nurturing forest ecosystems and their biological diversity. In my role on the Board of Natural Resources, which oversees forest trust lands in the state of Washington, I'm a firsthand witness to the legacy of impact he's had on the practice of forest management in Washington. His ideas about managing forests in ways that mimic natural disturbance patterns inform the decisions and practices of the agency on a daily basis. While Jerry has been retired from SEFS for a few years, he continues to publish, lecture, and participate in forest policy debates, including having published 2 volumes on the principles and practices of ecological forest management, and his most recent book from the Oregon State University Press on the making of the Northwest Forest Plan. We're grateful that he's taken time from his busy schedule to come and speak with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Franklin.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to come back up to a place I spent a lot of good years in and see a lot of old friends and colleagues in the audience. It's really good to be here. It's really good to see you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. And it's my job in my advanced age to try to share some history, particularly with the young people, because I often don't know quite how we got here and what a difficult road was. And so I've taken as my theme, the notion of what we have learned. And I really credit the old growth forest and other natural forests for the contribution that they've made to our learning process. Well, you do have to be prepared to learn if you're going to learn from nature. And I've had a wonderful group of colleagues who are very good at that. So, I'm mainly going to talk about just the Douglas fir region, western Washington, northwestern Oregon. That's kind of where I'm going to stay focused. And I want to cover 3 topics. Give you some sense of what we've learned about these forests. Secondly, what some of the consequences have been of that learning process, and what it also tells us about what our responsibilities are now in this 21st century, where so much has changed so fundamentally and is continuing to change at a very rapid rate. So, first of all, I go back 65 years to when I was an undergraduate in forestry school, and the foresters knew very clearly what forests were. Forests were a collection of trees that were to be managed primarily for the production of wood. And if you really can't believe it was that simple, it was that simple. And the belief generally was that if you did that well, that you'd do good for other forest issues as well. And interestingly, even though we'd done decades of research, none of the research had focused on the nature of the natural forest ecosystem. All of the focus was on how you do production with Douglas firs, for example. So we knew a lot about Douglas fir. We knew how to thin it. We knew how it was going to grow over time. We knew how to cut it. We knew how to regenerate it. But we didn't know anything about the Douglas fir ecosystem. We did know how to use that species of tree to achieve our objective of wood production. And if you'd ask somebody, tell me about old growth, no one could tell you anything about old growth. The foresters would tell you, wow, there's a lot of wood out there, and we're going to cut it. We're going to convert these forests to plantations that are much more efficient at producing wood. So they saw it as a wood bin. If you asked an environmentalist, they'd say, well, I don't know anything about it, but I'm inspired by it. I love the beauty of it. I love the inspiration it provides. But again, no one, almost no one, really knew anything about our west side coniferous forest ecosystem, or how Douglas fir worked as a species, as a part of that system. So, our scientific understanding was pretty close to zero, and Forest Service had decided they didn't need to do any more research on Douglas fir. They knew how they were going to convert the old growth to managed forest. And the forestry schools weren't interested in it either. For the most part, the forestry schools were interested in trying to help the agencies to do what they had already planned to do. And so that was the situation, and some of my colleagues and I, particularly Ted Derniss, would bootleg some research activities whenever we got a chance, but we really couldn't get much going. And then an opportunity presented itself. In the late 60s, there was the International Biological Program, IBP. And some scientists went to Congress and got Congress to appropriate a significant amount of money for the US IBP program. And they gave it to NSF, and NSF said, well, we really don't like this, you're doing it this way, but when Congress gives you the money, you find a way to do it. And so there was this IBP program, billions of dollars were available over a 5-year period. And the main focus of IBP was to study ecosystems. Now, ecosystem science was a very new concept at that point. But they were going to study a desert biome, desert ecosystem. They're going to study a prairie ecosystem, going to study a tundra ecosystem, study an eastern coniferous forest, or eastern hardwood forest ecosystem, and a western coniferous forest. And the University of Washington had the lead with NSF in developing the coniferous forest biome research program. Well, some of us came up from Corvallis, a mixture of academics and Forest Service scientists, and we got into a bit of a fight with the University of Washington about whether or not we were going to get a piece of the action. In the end, we almost lost the program, but we finally decided to compromise, and we did get a piece of the program at Oregon State. There was also a bigger piece of the program here at the University of Washington. That's cool, okay. Now, we got a sack of money, and there's really very little attached in the way of strings to that money. And the experiment station doesn't have any control over us, and the School of Forestry doesn't have any control over us. So we're free agents to do something. And we decide to study an old growth forest ecosystem. And we had a nice watershed in the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, and we began to focus our work there. So that is where the program started. But the science that began there grew to encompass not just the old growth, but in fact, all of the stages in forest development, natural forest development. And as I'll say, along the way, Mount St. Helens contributed very substantially to that. And the University of Washington developed a program at the Wind River Experimental Forest with a canopy crane that really provided the hardcore information on the carbon dynamics of the forest. But in any case, we began in the late 60s in our study of an old growth forest. And we began having discoveries right away. First of all, we didn't have any working hypotheses. We didn't know enough about an old growth forest to provide any working hypotheses. So we just decided, okay, we will do a carbon or energy budget for this forest. We will do a nutrient budget for this forest. and we will do a hydrologic budget for this forest. And that is how we will begin to get into understanding this. And of course, the first thing you do in a carbon budget is you go out and find out, where is the carbon out here and in what form is it? And of course, we begin to discover some things very quickly. For example, there was a lot of dead wood out there. All kinds of standing dead trees and down logs on the forest floor. And so you couldn't do your carbon budget without taking account of dead wood. Now, if you think that's obvious, the summary tables globally for forest carbon dynamics didn't have a category for dead wood because nobody else had so much of it that they needed to care about it. They ignored it. We could not ignore the dead wood in these forests. And it was just one of many epiphanies that we had. And this was a very traumatic discovery for the forestry profession, because foresters viewed dead wood as unhealthy. More than that, they viewed it as dangerous and potential fuels. And the only value to a dead tree was to put it on a truck and take it to the mill. And our discovery that, this is really a very significant structural element of the forest was very, very difficult for the profession to really engage and begin to accept. And of course, it was also very important in the stream systems. And one of the things that we had finally done in the IBP studies was the aquatic people were forced to come out and get up on the land, and us land birds were down there in the stream getting wet. So we were really looking at that interaction between the forest and the stream. So we began to have these discoveries, these epiphanies right away. For me, it was the first time I really experienced and understood that I was having an epiphany, seeing something I was so familiar with in a new way. And I was stunned by the fact that I could have spent as much time as I had in the woods and not appreciated that wood might have some ecological value. And indeed, it did. And of course, it's critical as wildlife habitat. Here's where a forester for Weyerhaeuser and I would differ. That forester would say, that's unhealthy. You shouldn't have anything dead out there. It'll all be green. And I would say that you do not have a credible forest ecosystem if you do not have dead wood as a part of that system, because it is so fundamentally important to providing habitat for the biota. Anyway, there were many more discoveries. One of the things we wanted to study was what was going on in the canopies. So one of the scientists said, the way to do that is we'll just cut down an old tree and look at what's in the canopy. And so we cut down an old tree, and that canopy was spread out over 4 or 5 acres by the time it got to the ground. And we discovered, no, you can't study canopies by laying them on the forest floor. You have to climb those trees. And 2 female graduate students at the University of Oregon developed a climbing technique based on mountain climbing gear and began in-place studies in the canopy. Of course, we at the University of Washington later acquired a canopy crane, which really allowed us a much easier kind of access to the canopy of an intact old growth forest. So we proceeded for several years, and then a mountain blew up. May 18th, 1980. Mount St. Helens blows up. And we're all excited. The people here in Seattle are excited. The people in Corvallis are excited. Oh my gosh, we're going to get to go out and look at this place. And being the brilliant scientists we are, we figured out it's a moonscape. Everything is gone. All the living organisms are going to have to come in from outside the blast zone. And we actually, a bunch of us flew over the area before they would let us land, and sure enough, it's brown, it's black, it's gray, it's all dead. Everything's going to have to come in from outside. So we finally, 10 days after the eruption, get to go in and land. And I'm leading the expedition, and the first one out of the helicopter when we sat down in the blast zone, and I look, and there's a green plant coming up through the ash. And there's hundreds, thousands of plants coming up. And there's ants and beetles and gophers digging out from under the soil. And the lesson from Mount St. Helens, especially in that first couple of years, was survivors, legacies, living organisms that persisted through that powerful eruption and became very important in the process of reestablishment of the post-eruption ecosystem. There was also a tremendous amount of dead organic matter. You know, the trees hadn't been shredded into small pieces except right close to the mountain, and so there was tremendous amount of dead organic material, some in the form of logs and snags that had powerful influences on geomorphic processes as well as biological processes. So from that early Mount St. Helens work, we developed the concept of biological legacies. Legacies, organic legacies, living and dead, from the pre-disturbance ecosystem that become a part of the post-disturbance ecosystem, a very important part. And from it also the lesson that nature rarely has a disturbance that wipes the slate clean. Almost always there are tremendous legacies. Look at a burn sometime, and look at the incredible legacies of standing dead and down material that it leaves behind. And so, this concept of legacies tells us that nature traditionally left living and dead materials behind that became very important. Not at all like what we were doing with clear cutting, where the sign of a good forester was bare earth, nothing left behind. And legacies became the whole basis for the concept of retention. If you're going to harvest, then leave something behind. Now again, is this some kind of brain thing? I mean, wasn't it pretty obvious that the thing to do if clear cutting isn't working the way you want it to do, leave some trees behind? Well, that was blasphemy. That was blasphemy. That was idiotic forestry, stupid forestry. But, of course, it became the whole basis for a new way of thinking about forest harvest. Now, there was a second lesson from Mount St. Helens, and that was that after the eruption, you know, I wasn't very interested in what was going on at all, because I was thinking it was just nothing but weeds and generalists, and there wasn't anything interesting there. And then about 20 years after the eruption, I was wondering about the blast zone, and I was thinking, gosh, I wonder if forest is going to get back. It's going to be too long. And then I was thinking, now all the birds I'm hearing, all the butterflies and birds I'm seeing, all the coyotes I hear howling, and in fact, what had happened was the blast zone had become the most biologically diverse area in the entire Cascade Range. Because once you removed that canopy of trees and you allowed the rest of the vegetation to develop, it became very rich. Lots of different food sources, incredible array of food chains. And in fact, not only were they not weeds, but in fact the vast majority of the biota were organisms that required that kind of habitat and can't exist if it doesn't have some of that kind of habitat. Can you imagine a meadowlark in the middle of the Cascade Range? And that's what happened. In any case, it made me really appreciate the importance of the early successional ecosystem, that period between a disturbance event and when you reestablish a closed canopy forest once again. Very important, not just for biological diversity, but because of the many functions, processes that go on during that open, warmer, sunnier period. So, we end up, after some 20, 25 years of study, with a really comprehensive view of the fundamentals of a coniferous forest ecosystem. And it means it is an ecosystem. It is very complex structurally, very rich in structures, and incidentally very distinctive in the way those structures are arranged spatially, nothing like a plantation, and very biologically rich kind of a system. So, we really understood the fundamentals of a coniferous forest ecosystem. And one of the things that's really interesting is to realize that all forests are working forests. A lot of foresters like to talk about working foresters as only being the ones that are being harvested. And that is, to put it kindly, bullshit. All forest ecosystems are doing work that's very important to us as humans living on this planet. And they're doing work related to production, and in fact, the energetic base of life, of your life and my life, they're the green plants, including the trees that are out there. They are the beginning of it. They produce the energy-rich carbon compounds that make everything go. The forests are very important in terms of the material cycles related to things like nutrient cycling, but also stabilization of influencing geomorphic phenomena. And they are fundamentally critical in the hydrologic cycle. And probably nothing's more important today in this century than the role that forest plays in regulating and participating in the hydrologic cycle. So, finally, of course, these forests, these complex forests, provide the habitat for this tremendous array of organisms. So, we understand these things, and we understand that all forests are working forests. And then the question is, okay, you did this science, what do you do with it? What difference does it make? And one clear example of where it became very relevant very quickly was in the development of the Northwest Forest Plan. And I'd love to regale you with the whole process, but that's 3 or 4 lectures in itself about how the plan came to be. Simply say this, that here in Seattle, a judge shut down timber harvesting on the federal lands, which was about 5 billion board feet a year. And no one could find a solution to the problem, which was the agencies, BLM and Forest Service, had not provided a credible plan, a scientifically credible plan for management of the northern spotted owl. So, In the end, the Bush administration couldn't solve it. Congress couldn't solve it. And what happened ultimately was President Clinton said that when he's elected president, he is going to solve it. Now that's a funny story in itself, because his environmental consultant, a young woman of 29, had told him, don't get involved in the timber stuff. This is a loser. You can't win on this one. And he immediately, of course, chose to ignore that and announced he was going to, if elected, resolve this issue. And he began a process of doing that.
Keep going. There's music playing, and I don't know why. Does anybody know why there's music playing?
So, in any case, Clinton did just exactly that. He established a forest management team to, in fact, review the science for him and provide him with alternatives for an EIS process that was scientifically credible, legal under existing law, and consistent with the proceeding, provided as much relief as possible for the impacted communities. So, in the end, it was the science of ecosystems here in the Northwest that provided the scientific basis for the development of the Northwest Forest Plan. And it's in this book. We'll be back here the first Tuesday in June for a book signing on this book. But basically, that ecosystem science provided the solution that allowed the development of a judicially acceptable Northwest Forest Plan, and so activities could once again begin. Now, I'll just say one thing about the Northwest Forest Plan. It was very interesting. It changed everything, but it resolved very little. But by changing everything, it made it possible for, once again, things to move forward, processes to happen, and changed the emphasis on the federal lands from an emphasis on timber production to an emphasis on ecological conservation. So, changed everything, resolved very little. And I often relate it to what the military say about the war plan they develop for how they're going to fight the war. The first casualty of the war is that plan. And that's kind of what happened with the Northwest Forest Plan. Now, I think ecosystem science really provides us with a basis for assessing and moving forward on what I think are the really important issues that we need to be dealing with here in the Douglas fir region. And the first of these is a fairly straightforward one. And it may well happen in a process of revising the Northwest Forest Plan. And that is simply, when we did the Northwest Forest Plan, a couple of million acres of naturally regenerated, unharvested, mature, and old forests were left outside of the preserves, left in the matrix and potentially to be harvested. And I think at this point in time, we understand very clearly that it should be reserved, because these forests are probably essentially the only complete forest ecosystems that we still have within the Douglas fir region. Everything else has been altered, mostly very significantly through the process of clear cutting. So, on Norm Johnson's agenda and on my agenda, our efforts are directed towards a revision of the Northwest Forest Plan that reserves all of the remaining mature and old forests. And we're talking about a couple of million acres. Now, this is very political process. It's a very social process, and there's going to have to be a lot of work to do this because we have to have a quid pro quo. We can't just set aside more and not provide opportunities for management elsewhere. But I would just simply tell you there are good alternatives that provide for the kind of trade-offs we need to reserve the remaining older forest. Now, the second thing that we need to be doing is much more complicated. So, we spent a generation in which we were clear-cutting, burning, planting pure stands, monocultures of even-age Douglas fir forest. And we know now that they are not capable of providing many of the forest functions that we as a society want to be performed. They do not provide for good watershed protection. They use excessive amounts of water. They are extremely vulnerable to fire. They have no resistance to fire and no resilience after fire. And so what are we going to do with our managed forest landscapes? And my proposal is that we in fact need to begin to think and do a major program of restoring the plantation landscapes. We need in fact to replace the plantations with managed forest systems which have structural complexity and biological richness. And in that same process have superior resistance to things like wildfire and resilience following wildfire. And we have a pretty good idea of how you might begin to think about and do that. The Bureau of Land Management, incidentally, is one of the leaders in this down in Oregon. They are doing that kind of forest management. And DNR is definitely progressing and flirting with it. They haven't gone as far as they need to do, I think, but they're on their way. Now, this isn't to say bad things about plantations, except I just said bad things about plantations. It is to say that they weren't designed, for God's sake, to provide for all of these functions. Plantations were designed by foresters for efficient production of wood. That's what they were designed to do, and they do that. But they don't do many of the other things that we want our forest ecosystems to do. And so we won't, in fact, perpetuate another 50 years of that kind of management. But we need to begin developing appreciation for the fact that we need to replace those managed forests with a different kind of managed forest. And it's not an impossible task. The last thing I want to mention has to do with the conditions and activities on the historical industrial forest lands. And in the old days, the industrial forest lands were part of vertically integrated companies that managed those forests to provide wood to their processing facilities, their mills. And in the process of that, whatever else they did, they really tried to maximize wood production. Now, for various reasons, in the last 30 years, these vertically oriented wood products companies divested themselves of their industrial forest lands. Now, mind you, these are the most productive forest lands in Western Washington. In fact, they're among the most productive forest lands in the world. And they are growing a most extraordinary tree species, Douglas fir. But these forest lands now are being managed not for primarily for maximizing wood production or anything else. They are being managed with the primary goal of providing a high return on capital to the investors who have acquired these lands. And you do that by managing forests on a very short rotation. Now, rotation might typically be 40 years. At 40 years, Douglas fir has only got its roots in the ground. And Douglas fir is a long-distance runner. It's not a sprinter. And if you want to really get what's good out of that species and those lands, you have to use a rotation of 100 years, more or less, in order to realize the real potential of those lands. And so today, the historic industrial forest lands are the environmentally underperforming forest lands of Western Washington. We are deriving essentially no environmental value from the current management regime on those forests. And here is where our greatest potential lies to actually change the forest landscape of Western Washington and Northwestern Oregon by changing the practices on those lands. We'd be better off if they were back in the days of the vertically integrated timber corporations. They'd be managed much better than they are now. So we have to, as a society, begin to recognize this and to make moves to change this, because it's just too big and important a forest resource to let it continue to be managed in an environmentally absent way. Now, there are three things we can think about. One is regulation. And we have, particularly in the state of Washington, provided regulations that require those investment companies, timber investment management organizations, real estate investment trusts, to do some good by the riparian and aquatic systems. So they are not unconstrained in what they can do. But we've done nothing in terms of the areas, the upland areas, away from those aquatic systems. So we need to think about what we want to do in the way of regulation to begin changing what's happening on those lands. Secondly, we can think about ways of providing incentives for them to do something else. And if we really had a meaningful carbon market, we could, in fact, persuade a lot of those investment firms to use longer rotations, which is the single most important thing that could happen. Managing on rotations of, say, 80 years rather than 40 years. So financial incentives, carrots, to get them to do things differently. The third thing we need to think about is buying those lands. And these are capitalists. Weyerhaeuser Corporation in the old day would never, ever think of selling their land to you. They were proud of their land. They were proud of what they did with it. Weyerhaeuser that exists today would sell you anything. They'll sell you your grandmother if you'll pay enough. You know, they have nothing that is sacred to them in terms of lands. So they can be had. And we need to be thinking about all those things and probably some other things that I haven't figured out yet. But that is a huge, important issue that we need to be dealing with. We cannot allow our most productive forest lands to continue to be managed in ways which fail to contribute significantly to our other forest environmental goals. We can't do it. We've got to do something about that. And I'm going to challenge the environmental community to stop, picking out the low-hanging fruit, harassing the various agencies about things when they aren't doing anything about what are the really big, important issues. And I understand it's going to be hard to change these things, particularly in our society. So I'll leave it at that and simply say, you know, we've learned a tremendous amount about these forest ecosystems. And among other things, it should have made us much more humble in terms of how we think about them and how we think about interacting with them in a management sense. And we need to be thinking about an era in which we are truly, as human beings, as human societies, interacting positively with nature to the mutual benefit of both. And it's nonsense to think about simply walking away from all of these forests that would so dramatically altered. It would not be good stewardship to do that. A good steward will participate with our knowledge and our capabilities in restoring these systems and sustaining them in the face of climate change and many other things that may affect them. Can't walk away from our responsibilities as managers, and we can't leave it to nature to do with all the things we've changed. So that's my message, and did I get it done in 45 minutes? I'm in the hands of Dan. He's going to handle the... Oh,
I have a gift for you. And those of you online, I'm giving Jerry a gift that the school had given to retirees over many years. This is the last one. I was given this when I started as director 5 years ago.
Oh.
That this was the gift that was given to retirees of the school. And we had one left. And you get to have the last one.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. With that, we are open for questions. If you're interested in asking Dr. Franklin a question, please come to the microphone. And for those of you online, please submit your question to the chat. Dr. Franklin's given us much to think about and probably much to ask about. First question.
See, it's what happens when you have a midget doing this. A couple things to sort of roll them off together. I know that the first people here used to do controlled burns in order to regenerate the forest, because some trees need to have burns in order for their seeds to actually grow. And unfortunately, they don't seem to do that in timber cutting companies. You know, they don't cut and then let the stuff they don't want fall to the ground and burn it. And I don't know if you do any kind of encouragement about that. And secondly, timber companies, have they actually changed how they do their, quote, forest management, unquote, knowing the changes in the science?
Question about controlled burns
Yeah.
and changes in...
Yeah, I think, fire has much less of a role in the Douglas fir forest than it has in the pine forest in the east side, where it has a very profound role and where we made a different kind of mistake than we made on this side of the mountains. So, and there is a role for fire, but it needs to be relatively limited and often can be a part of harvesting activities, dealing with slash, but even more stimulating the response of the site in terms of revegetation. So the use of fire in the Douglas fir forest itself was much more limited than it was in certain areas, high mountain areas, and the east side and the valleys. So, as far as management is concerned, there are a lot of changes taking place, and we see the Bureau of Land Management in Oregon totally adopting ecologically management-based approaches. Interestingly, we see in this state that the most innovative large forest management organization is the Department of Natural Resources. And while people may not be completely happy with what they're doing, it's so profoundly changed from what it was doing 30 years ago as to defy belief. So it is an innovative organization, and you tend to find the most innovative organizations which have a conflicting duty, both ecologic and economic, and so creates a tension that makes you really work at figuring out how am I going to meet both of these obligations. And I just add to that we do need an indigenous wood products industry, and we do need people who love to work in the woods and are capable of working in the woods. We need that for the sake of the forest system, quite regardless of what other reasons we might need it.
Thank you. There's a follow-up question online. I'm going to ask it as a follow-up question about fire. What has the increase in wildfire taught us about forest ecology and management?
Well, it's interesting. It isn't so much that wildfire has increased, and it's very different on the east side than the west side. On the east side, fire was very frequent, and we reduced its frequency with the consequence that now it isn't so much that we have more fires, it's that they're catastrophic fires that kill everything, which never happened historically when the fires were allowed to come every 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years. So, that's a very different situation, and we need to put fire back into that landscape in order to get it back into a credible, functional situation. On the west side, we actually have increased the fire frequency from what it was historically. Settlement by Europeans probably increased the frequency of fire here by a factor of about 2. So, for example, the fire return interval in Mount Rainier National Park went from 427 years to 275 years as white settlement occurred. Now, the problem that we have with fire is these forests didn't ever burn historically very frequently, but they are fuel-loaded systems. These are productive forests. There's a lot of fuel. There's always a lot of fuel out there. And most of the time, it won't burn. Or it won't burn very vigorously. But if, in fact, you have a fire out there, an ignition, and you get an east wind event, you have the potential for a catastrophic event. And so we saw recently what can happen in Western Oregon. And it's not unnatural in terms of the way the forests burn, but our concern has to be with trying to reduce the number of ignitions that are out there and have the potential of becoming conflagrations when we get an east wind event. And we have a bigger challenge with fire in the Douglas fir region than we do in the east side, because of the fact that we are always fuel-loaded systems, and there isn't a damn thing we can really do about it. On the east side, we can restore those systems. so they aren't vulnerable to catastrophic fire. So, very different fire regimes on the two sides, very different strategies. For example, in the Douglas Fir region, it is logical to have an aggressive program for detecting and controlling wildfires, because you just don't want a whole bunch of ignition sitting out there ready to go the next time we get an east wind. So anyway, that's my perspective on fire.
Next question.
First off, I just want to say thank you for coming here. It's an honor to meet you. Your work is what inspired me to go into forestry research, and it was a treat to hear you speak. So my question is about federal management, management on federal lands. I know that the Northwest Forest Plan really changed how we conduct management on these lands, and that has led to this fuel buildup that you were just talking about on these federal lands where harvesting isn't occurring. So if you could go back in time with this knowledge of how things would play out, for 30, 40 years in the future, what would you do differently?
From what we did, well, I'd do a very different kind of forest management. I would do a forest management that involves a lot of retention. I don't know if you know what I mean by retention, but I'm talking about leaving things behind. Some of it in the form of patches of forest, some of it as individual structures. And that would be a very important difference from what we chose to do. I certainly would not be attempting to convert forest landscapes into even-age monocultures of Douglas fir. So essentially what I would be trying to do is create what I now am proposing to recreate: structurally complex, biologically rich, managed forest systems. Now mind you, that has to include some significant openings. We need that. We need that for early succession. We need that so that we can regenerate the shade-intolerant species. But even those openings would have some retention in them. Dead trees, live trees, down logs. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you.
Go to another question online here. You mentioned the need for trade-off, quid pro quo, in order to preserve the last unprotected remnants of old-growth forest or the naturally regenerated, harvested forests. I wonder if there are examples of such trade-offs. What do those trade-offs entail?
Well, as a very simple example, when we did the Northwest Forest Plan, we set aside large contiguous blocks of habitat, but that habitat was not continuous, mature and old forest. There were a lot of it that had already been harvested. So a lot of almost all of the reserves, in fact, represent areas that have been fragmented through past harvest practices and significant plantation forests within the reserves. And we could imagine, for example, revisiting the boundaries of some of those late successional reserves to remove some of that previously harvested forest from those reserves. Or we could simply change the rules and say that yes, you could do some management and some harvesting in previously harvested patches within the reserves. So, and the idea is that you want to allow for enough land that you are actively managing for many things, including timber production, to maintain an indigenous wood products industry and to maintain the workforces that we need and to help subsidize the very significant costs associated with sustaining these forest ecosystems. So that's very simply stated, and there's a lot embedded in that, but That's my response.
Hi, my name is Ozzie Pierce. I'm a resident of the Crystal Lake Tree Farm over in Woodinville, Washington. It was established by Ron Monroe. You may know him.
No, I don't.
Yeah, he's since passed on. Anyway, he's a forester, graduated from here. Anyway, my question is, as we try to carry on his legacy of our community tree farm, we've come into various issues that
Sure.
we encounter. We have about 200 acres of tree farm. But our most important and pressing issue right now would be laminated root rot. We seem to have an infestation of laminated root rot with our Douglas fir. Do you have any advice on, with your forestry plan techniques on how to manage that laminated root rot?
Well, laminated root rot is a real challenge if you've got a lot of it in young Douglas fir. But obviously, one of the things you do is you shift to some other species. And one of the things that I didn't mention that I really feel is important is we need to begin to manage much more with deciduous hardwoods. And incorporating deciduous hardwoods into our managed forest ecosystems is really important because of the many positive benefits that come from purposely including significant deciduous hardwoods. One very simple one is, in fact, you obviously dramatically increase the diversity present within the managed forest. A whole different array of organisms relates to the deciduous hardwoods as composed to the conifers. But to give you an even more specific example, deciduous hardwoods are much more resistant to fire, and they are wonderfully resilient following fire. They sprout and provide a very quick response that helps stabilize the soil following events. You know, you look at a monoculture, you look at some of Weyerhaeuser's lands that were burned down by Springfield, and then between the clear cutting and the spraying, there's nothing after the fire. There's no green. There's no ability of the system to respond in any way with its resilience. Resilience belongs to the angiosperms, and we need to include them in our forests in order to get that advantage along with other advantages. One last thing I'll say about hardwoods, they also use less water. We always think they use more water. No, they don't. They don't have their leaves for half the year. And so every study that's been done in North America, and there are at least 3, has shown that the hardwoods are more conservative of water than the conifers are. And our plantations are horrendous in their prolificate use of water. They use much more water than the natural forest systems do, even young natural forest systems. So,
Thank you.
good luck.
So,
You are a very important person.
so while Dr. Franklin said he would stay here till midnight, I'm going to give one more question,
Okay.
and we'll take a break in case other people have other things to do and can't stay till midnight, and then we'll see what happens from there.
I was a little facetious. I really can't stay till midnight, I'm sorry.
All right. Hello, Dr. Franklin. My name is Madison Norton, and I am with the West Side Forest Branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service, but I come here as a civilian, no official business. So we are entering a new age of forest management at this time. The Forest Service is proposing a brand new programmatic biological opinion, which has very intense management, a lot of flexibility, and they are seemingly unreceptive to our feedback. We are in this quagmire of an ecological and economic resource battle. I'm focused on conserving endangered species, and they're focused on high yield on investment. I was wondering if you had any advice for working with partners who are potentially unwilling to change their legacy management ways, given the recent body of science that is coming out.
Well, I'd like to know which branch of the Forest Service is doing this.
It's the regional forester who is now retired. It's the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, Gifford Pinchot National Forest, and Olympic National Forest.
Okay, well, if in fact the Forest Service is going to propose intensive management for wood production, they will be in violation of their own Planning Act. And, you know, ultimately, if you can't do anything else, you take them to court. Now, hopefully, you know, I see many Forest Service districts and even forests that are very open to doing things in a very different way. And in fact, I had one of the most interesting trips I had ever had with a regional forester, with the retiring regional forester. And it was because Norm Johnson and I had become involved in protesting the flat country sale on the Willamette National Forest. And I'll say this about him: I've never had a regional forester listen so carefully to what we said on the field trip that he had requested, and we did. So I'm very hopeful that the organization will be persuaded to, in fact, adopt ecological forest management. But in any case, the agency isn't going to be able to do a damn thing if it does not embrace the Fish and Wildlife Service with regards to its strategy on the northern spotted owl. So they're stuck.
Yeah.
And the reason the Bureau of Land Management has done so well is they embraced the Fish and Wildlife Service. And that agency is the only one that's really produced a regional plan for anything. So good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
And don't let them get away with it.
Try.
I want to thank you again for a wonderful evening, wonderful
Thank
talk, and thanks for the insightful questions. And maybe not midnight, but maybe you'll stick around for some questions after as well.
I'll stick around for a while, you bet. Nothing like trying to field questions to make you think. Me think. So,
Sorry we didn't get to all the questions online.
Will this be posted online? Yes. Okay, so you can follow my questions now?
The question and answer period is also, will be part of the recording.